We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! This is Rizzy and I'm back with part 10 of What If Naruto Was a Simple Teenage Shop Owner. Things aren't always as simple as they seem. Just because he found himself in a new world, Naruto shouldn't have forgotten this. Now he must deal with fallen angels, devils, perverts and God, all while maintaining a relationship and running his store. Things can never be simple for him. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 34. No, Naruto, you haven't even sat down and listened. I said no. There is nothing you can say that can change my mind. I told you this wasn't going to go well. Artemis turned toward her uncle. In the background, Naruto could be seen marching away from the group of giants. Let me talk to him. The Earthshaker spoke before striding over toward the boy. His massive form had him within the blonde's range in a few short steps. Hello, Naruto. It is pleasure to meet you. I am Poseidon. To the Greeks, I am the god of the sea. The god greeted in the most cheerful voice he could muster. With his height advantage, he could clearly see the disgruntled look on his face. If he wanted his plans to work out, he needed the boy to be amicable, not disgruntled. When Naruto continued to walk, Poseidon knew that getting the boy to be happy wasn't going to be an easy task. Drastic measures would have to be taken if this went on for too long. This time, when Poseidon's foot came slamming down only a few feet in front of him, Naruto didn't hold the sage's chakra back. He allowed the golden, euphoric energy to flow from out of him, covering him in his cloak in an instant. Poseidon raised an eyebrow at the sudden transformation while Naruto settled into a defensive stance. I'm sorry if I startled you. The god spoke out. Naruto said nothing in response while keeping his eyes locked onto the giant. Behind him, the beginnings of his truth-seeking orbs were taking shape as he prepared to strike. Let me conform to something more fitting for this conversation. The Greek god said out loud before closing his eyes. Naruto tensed up when he felt a physical weight settle upon his shoulders. Whatever the god was doing was making him emit a large amount of energy that saturated the air around him. The blonde could feel the ground begin to shake underneath him as the energy grew more abundant. As the energy output seemed to reach its apex, Poseidon began to morph. It was a subtle change at first, it almost managing to escape Naruto's sharp eyes, yet as it carried on, its effects became much more noticeable. The giant began to shrink. The transformation wasn't instant nor was it slow. Gradually, every aspect of its being grew smaller until he stood at a height that put him only a few inches taller than Naruto. The blonde was grateful that the man's clothes had followed his lead in the shrinking process and provided the god with the same amount of modesty he had started with. After the day he had, the last thing he wanted to see was a naked Poseidon. I haven't been this small in years. The man chuckled out while giving his limbs a much-needed stretch. Compacting the full might of his power to such a small form was a bit of a struggle for him. Naruto remained in his crouch positioned, his eyes still focused on the god. At any moment, he was prepared to send one of the truth-seeking balls blasting forward at the man and wipe away any sign of his existence. He had had a bad day. I hope we can have a conversation now. I'm not the best talker so I'm not sure I can convince you, but let me at least explain some things. No. Naruto stated while standing back up to his full height. He made to move forward but stopped when Poseidon placed himself in his pathway. Deciding that he didn't want to immediately confront the man, Naruto ignored the blatant blocking attempt and stepped to his right. His brow furrowed when the Earthshaker moved in the way to block his path once again. Get out of my way. Naruto grunted out at the man. His patience had run out and if the god knew better, he would do the smart thing and move out of the way. Unfortunately for Naruto, Poseidon wasn't exactly known for his intelligence or his mind reading. The sea god stood firm in his spot, returning Naruto's glare with a gaze that he thought was calming but, in actuality, only served to piss the boy off even further. Look, we can talk about this. The man said while holding his hands above his head. He was hoping the gesture would be seen a non-threatening one by the blonde and would help get their interaction onto a good route. When the golden boy sighed, closed his eyes and relaxed in his stance, Poseidon thought he had managed to accomplish that. He soon discovered that his line of thinking was completely wrong when the blonde disappeared out of his sight. One moment, he was there, and the next, he was gone, a golden flash, the only proof that he had been there in the first place. Poseidon could only blink at his sudden departure before a loud sigh left his lips. That didn't go well, uncle. I know. We mustn't give up, though. He is the key to our victory. This was starting to become a pattern, he noted. He had once again arrived home late and almost every occupant of the house was asleep. The only one who seemed to be awake was Ophis, who had decided to wait for him by the door once more. Hello. At the sound of the dragon's soft voice, Naruto felt the exhaustion of the day, particularly his most recent conversation, settle onto his shoulders. He wanted nothing more than to brush past the girl, push her issues and the promise he made her away, lock himself in his room and block out the rest of the world. The temptation was high, enough to nearly push him to do it. But, once again, the moral side of him decided to hijack control of his body and speak despite the fact that it was in the minority. How was your day? The blonde questioned while moving toward the couch. If he wasn't able to convince himself to go jump into his bed, he would at least indulge himself in taking a seat. He deserved that, right? At least, that was what he told himself as he flopped down onto the piece of furniture with a low groan. It was fine. The dragon responded after following after the blonde. She sat across from him and watched as he sank deep down into the couch. Despite her limited knowledge of humans, even she could spot the exhaustion eating at the blonde's face. A part of her wished to speak up, spurring him to go get some rest. Yet, she did not know how to express this. Every time she opened her mouth to talk, all she heard was silence. The words that she desperately wanted to speak were trapped within her throat. The feeling was frustrating beyond belief to the young girl. Hey, Ophis. Naruto's sleepy voice cut through the dragon's inner conflict. A questioning hum was her reply as she saw the blonde focus what little bit of his attention he had left onto her through his half-lidded eyes. You want to head to the dimensional gap tomorrow and see if we can find Chow Chow? I need a break from the shop and I made you wait far enough. Once more, Ophis was unable to keep hold of her emotions as her eyes widened in shock. The words became jumbled in her mouth yet again, but this time she forced them out. Yes. I would like this. The dragon did her very best to ignore the heightened pitch of her voice as it left her mouth. She couldn't help it. How could she when the blonde was around her? When it came to her, almost every single thing the blonde did surprise her. It was all pleasant in an odd sort of way. She didn't usually like surprises, but Naruto was changing that. Though she hadn't yet learned to cope with the blonde's unselfish kindness and with the way he acting, she wasn't sure if she ever would. Good. A yawn forced the blonde's mouth open wide as he gave his limbs a long stretch. The yawn ended with the teen curling his legs up onto the couch while laying his head down on his hands. We can start first thing in the morning. Naruto mumbled out before his eyes came to a steady close. Ophis watched as the twin orbs disappeared beneath the boy's eyelids. He remained conscious for a few moments afterward, but the gentle and repetitive movements of his chest a minute later showed he hadn't managed to stave off unconsciousness. Ophis was silent as she watched the blonde's chest rise and fall. It was at this moment that the dragon realized just how defenseless Naruto was. One of the few beings, a human at that, who had managed to challenge her now laid unconscious only a few feet from where she sat. Even now in her weakened form, it would take little more than a thought from her to snuff out his life. The dragon pushed herself off the couch. Her landing made little noise as her feet began to carry her. Her eyes stayed focused on the sleeping boy while she made her way toward the couch. Each step was quiet, close to completely silent, as she grew closer to the boy. Within seconds, she stood at his side. Due to her height and the height of the couch, the blonde's resting head stood at her head level, offering her the perfect view of his resting face. As his soft snores met her ears, Ophis noted to herself that this was the first time she had gotten such a close look at her caretaker. Through their various bouts, encounters, and talks, she had never taken the chance to fully observe the boy's feature. Now, though, with him being so still and herself being so close, she could see it all. She could see the slight flaring of his nose with every breath he took. She could see how his whiskers would grow and shrink along with his snores. She could see the smallest edge of his teeth behind his thin lips. She could see the subtle twitching of his nose and the creasing of his brow as he fell deeper and deeper into sleep. She stood at his side, absorbing every single little detail with her eyes. She found the minute details fascinating, yet she did not know why. They were insignificant details. They held no importance or uniqueness. Every single human in existence made them at one point in their sleep. The dragon was sure that if she willed herself to sleep, she too would look similar to how the blonde looked. Yet those same bland features, when placed on the sleeping blonde, suddenly became interesting. They grew meaning. They made her feel something. She still didn't know what that something was, and that frustrated her. Emotions were frustrating in general. A part of her yearned to return to a point in time where the only worry in her life was the maintenance of her home. Those days had been filled with silence and comfort, two things she didn't receive very often nowadays. She missed those days. But now, staring down at the sleeping, she wasn't quite sure if she would exchange her present for the past. Her past had been filled with silence, but it had lacked the intrigue that the boy brought. It felt oddly pleasant to be curious about something. It made her days feel a lot more purposeful than before. A particularly loud snore tore her from her thoughts and forced her attention back onto the boy. The sight of his sleeping face brought forth a new feeling within her. It was an odd thing, more odd than her new set of unknown feeling. For once, she decided to give in to the feeling. Her hand rose up before she could think twice to stop herself. Its journey through the air lasted for only a few brief seconds before it arrived at its target. His skin was surprisingly soft considering how much she had heard how humans were hairy and dumb creatures. It sunk in at her touch yet flapped back to its original shape when she pulled back. She stared at her fingers with a sense of wonder before she pushed it back toward his face. This time, its target was the whisker marks on his face. Once more, she was surprised at the sensation that met her. Where the boy's skin was soft, the marks on his cheek was rough to the touch. It felt like she was rubbing soft pieces of bark as she dragged her fingers across his cheek. When the blonde released a particularly loud snore, Ophis pulled her hand back as if she had touched a flame. She was admittedly a little anxious when the boy's facial features scrunched up in some unseen agitation. Her anxiety grew when he lifted his arm from his stomach to scratch at the cheek she had been petting. But other than that, he did not stir. Which left her plenty more time to continue her examination of him. "What are you doing?" That time was cut down to 0 when a voice spoke out from behind her. With a slow nature to her movements, Ophis turned away from the dragon to face the new arrival, Kaneko. "I was examining." There was no shame in the dragon's words as she spoke. She had been caught in the act, yet, to her, she did nothing wrong. There was nothing to be bashful about. Kaneko hummed in response to the god's words but said nothing in response. Her arms remained folded across her chest as she stood across the room from her sleeping boyfriend and the curious dragon. "What is love?" Kaneko's arm came uncrossed at the sudden question from the dragon. That was something she hadn't been expecting. "Why do you ask?" The Nekashu gathered her composure. With how erratic Ophis had been lately, it wouldn't bode well for her to be off her game. Though, she didn't think it would matter much. She had a good idea on why the girl was asking her this question. Ophis didn't respond immediately. Instead, she broke eye contact with the Nekashu to look down at the sleeping Naruto. Even though Kaneko couldn't see the dragon's face, she could spot the inherent struggle within her body as she moved. Even from the back, it looked as if the dragon was fighting the urge to jump the blonde. "I don't understand it." The dragon finally spoke while remaining staring down at Naruto. "He says he cares about me. But, not like you. He says he loves you, and does stuff with you." Kaneko couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the somber tone that the dragon's voice had taken. The god sounded upset as she spoke. If the Nekashu was being completely fair, the dragon sounded like a sad child at that moment. There was also another emotion clear in the dragon's voice. Confusion. The Nekashu released a silent sigh to herself. She was beginning to see why Naruto found dealing with the girl so exhausting. Not even 100 words into their conversation and she was already regretting starting it. It felt as if she was trying to explain metaphysics to a child. A child with world-ending capabilities but still a child. Is this still about sex? Kaneko decided to be straightforward in her questioning. If the dragon was going to be so blunt in her questioning, so would she. "No," Ophis admitted while turning to face Kaneko. Her steady eyes had been rendered unsure as she stared at the Nekashu. "He." The dragon paused once more to look back at the blonde. A quiver ran through her body before she swung her body back toward a curious Kaneko. "He makes me feel odd." Kaneko nodded in understanding before taking a step toward the girl. Ophis whirled around at the sudden movement but did not move past that. She instead aimed a pointed look at the Nekasha, a look that Kaneko managed to return with ease. Does it feel like a mixture of curiosity and frustration? Ophis found herself nodding along to Kaneko's words without much thought to her actions. Surprisingly to her, the Nekasha had managed to sum up her current emotion state with her words. What do you want to do when you look at him? This question threw the dragon for a loop. What did she want to do when she looked at the blonde? She risked a glance away from Kaneko to do a live demonstration. Ophis paused as her eyes swept over Naruto. He makes me curious. I want to know him. The second set of words came rushing out of her mouth without any thought. It was the first time in her life that her mind spoke for her without her having to tell it to do so. It was an odd feeling, yet one she didn't find too horrible. Then talk to him. Ophis' attention shot back over Kaneko. If you want to know him, all you have to do is talk. He does it all the time. Talking. That was an idea she never put much thought into. As a being who embraced silence and everything that came with it, talking, up until a few months prior, had been a taboo thing. The only talking she did prior to that was with the Great Red, and she found that experience very unpleasant. Though, the idea of talking to Naruto, now that Kaneko had planted it in her head, didn't seem nearly as unpleasant. From the times when she would sit in his shop, she knew the blonde to be excitable, energetic, talkative and always bursting with happiness, all traits that she found unbearable. Yet, she didn't grow annoyed with him. The sound of his voice wasn't grating to her. Half of the time, she found herself straining against the capabilities of her headphones just to listen to the teen. Listening was half the battle, right? But would she be able to provide the other half? For the first time in a long time, Ophis found herself doubting herself and her ability to talk. She wasn't a talkative person and the world knew that. Talking is hard. Ophis found herself talking unconsciously once more. As the words left her mouth, the dragon noted to herself to fix that. Not with Naruto. If you don't talk, he will. If you talk, he'll talk twice as much. Kaneko's words were blunt but true. Her boyfriend had a motor mouth that never seemed to stop. Unless he was interacting with a god, of course. The dragon remained silent for a moment. Could she really do this? Talking was supposed to be simple, but could she really find it within her to subject herself to it? Okay. Ophis relented to the young lioness. She would give talking a try. If it would help calm the raging swirl of emotion within her, she would be a fool not to. Have fun. I'm going to sleep. Ophis blinked owlishly as she watched the Nekasha perform a swift turn and disappear down the house's hallway. The soft sound of feet landing against carpet carried for several seconds before the sound of a door closing alerted the dragon that she was once again alone with the sleeping blonde. With a silence that she had become all too accustomed to, Ophis turned to face Naruto once more. This time, however, the silence wasn't so comforting. It felt odd, especially after the conversation she just had. She felt the need to break it. So, she did the wrong thing she could to do just that. She began talking. He flies around, always shouting, always annoying. He does those tricks, he looks like an idiot. Those soft-spoken words were what Naruto woke up to. His eyes fluttered open with great effort on his part while the words floated through the air. He vaguely processed their meaning and who exactly they were coming from as he began to rise up from the couch. His ascension stopped midway through when a stab of pain cut through his spine. His hand shot up to support the stiff structure while he hissed loudly, "Never sleeping on the couch again." The blonde mumbled to himself while holding his spine. What had been soft and comfortable last night during his bout of tiredness had come back to bite him in the ass. "Hello." Naruto nearly launched himself off of the couch at the sound of the voice. Ignoring the pain plaguing his spine, he turned to see Ophis sat directly next to him. Silence filled the air as the duo met eyes. Blue clashed with gray as both beings waited for one another to speak. "Good morning." Surprisingly, at least for the blonde, Ophis was the one to break silence, albeit with a little bit of difficulty. A night of talking to herself and an unconscious Naruto hadn't made her a natural conversationalist. "Morning," the blonde replied while taking a subtle glance around the room. The last thing he remembered was having an exhaustion-filled conversation with Ophis before succumbing to the whim of sleep. Any distrust between the two had completely left the boy's mind in that moment of exhaustion. Looking at the dragon staring up at him with such large and trusting eyes made it difficult for him to regurgitate that same mistrust. How long have you been up? Naruto asked, attempting to spur the conversation forward. If Ophis was the first thing he woke up to, he would at least attempt to speak with her. All night. Out came the dragon's response. At her words, Naruto turned back to her with a raised eyebrow. All night? He echoed, not entirely believing her. Though, when she nodded a moment later, he couldn't find any reason to not believe. Those eyes just seemed too innocent to lie to him right now. He knew the dragon was anything but innocent, but those eyes made him briefly believe otherwise. Why were you up all night? I was talking to you. Before Naruto could even begin to question that statement, 5 knocks echoed off the front door. Both occupants of the room turned their head toward the sound before looking back at each other. Ah! I'll get it. The blonde scurried off the couch and up to his feet before striding across the length of his living room. He quickly arrived at his front door where he unlocked it without a second thought and let it swing open. Hello! It took only a brief look over at the practically glowing blonde mad for Naruto to deduce that the person standing at his front step was a god. He reacted in the only way he could have reacted. He slammed the door shut in the god's face. Well, that was rude. Apollo ran a hand through his golden hair while staring at the wooden door in front of him. Artemis and Poseidon had warned him that Naruto wasn't very fond of the divine, yet he hadn't expected such a rude response. Time to up the charisma, the god said while clapping his hands together. The golden glow surrounding him grew brighter as he reached out to knock at Naruto's door. When his knuckles met the door's wooden surface, speckles of gold flakes fell from his skin and attached to the door. With each tap, the gold grew larger and brighter until the whole entire door was encompassed by the strange energy. Apollo was about to knock once more but stopped himself when the door swung open. A frown appeared on his face as he watched the golden flakes disperse from the door. His sadness lasted only for a moment before returned his attention to the grumpy-looking blonde who had answered the door. Hello! Apollo greeted the teen with a bright smile and a wave of his hand. The prominent frown on Naruto's face told the god everything he needed to know about his current mood. The boy radiated agitation. That wouldn't stop the god, though. If the teen was going to radiate irritation, he was going to radiate happiness. I've been told to tell you to go away. The blonde grunted out in a monotone voice. Apollo raised a single eyebrow at the odd phrasing of his words but carried on nonetheless. I'm not going. I'm not real Naruto. Apollo's planned spiel came to a screeching halt at his words. He tilted his head to the side a small amount while his mind attempted to process the blonde's words. What do you mean by that? The god questioned, hoping that some clarification would be able to clear up his confusion. As a god of knowledge, not knowing something was a thing he did not enjoy. I'm a clone. The real Naruto left a couple of seconds ago. This was something he did not expect. Apollo tilted his head to the side while staring at the apathetic supposed clone. He had come to talk to the real teen, not some grumpy copy. Well, can you leave a message for me? No. Those were the clone's parting words before he shut the door, leaving the god standing alone on the doorstep. Apollo's face was blank for several long moments while he remained staring forward at the door. Slowly, a frown began to form against the god's lips while his usual golden glow faded to a dull shine. This is going to be difficult. Never in his wildest dreams did he imagine he would reach a stage like this within his lifetime. Chance encounters with gods, escape visits from the deepest parts of heaven, or the accidental creation of his own religion hadn't managed to lead him to this wild conclusion. But he was here. Despite the minuscule probability of the situation ever occurring, he found himself hiding out from a group of gods in a dimension that existed between dimensions with an exhausted dragon laid across his legs. Why can't things just be simple? Naruto thought to himself while looking down at his legs, which were currently trapped beneath the weight of an exhausted dragon. The girl had forsaken any sense of her usual properness as her whole body sat stretched across his legs. For the first time since their fated meeting, he could hear short gasps exiting the girl. It was one of the few signs of exhaustion he had ever seen from Ophis. The action served to disturb him more than their current position as he found himself awkwardly awaiting its end. Maybe try comforting her. The idea, which would make perfect sense in the context of any other normal being, would make perfect sense. Unfortunately, Ophis was nowhere near normal. Just months prior, the dragon had wanted to kill him. That intent to kill had turned into an apparent want of sex within moments which, in the blonde's own honest, was more troublesome than her wanting to kill him. Though, at this point in his life, he was willing to try anything. So, with slight hesitation, Naruto reached an arm down to the dragon's back. A light frown appeared on his lips when he felt her stiffen up. The sensible part of him demanded that he pull his hand away immediately, yet he ignored it. For a reason unknown even to him, he continued to rub. Surprisingly, at least to the blonde, his actions didn't result in him getting blasted away by the girl. The small ministrations given by him actually did their part in comforting the tired girl. Ever so slowly, her sharp breaths began to smooth out. The rise and fall of her chest settled into an almost unnoticeable rhythm. The pained expression, even though Naruto couldn't see it, morphed into one of content as Ophis closed her eyes and allowed herself to enjoy his touch. Ophis? The dragon's eyes snapped open at the boy's words. His hand came to a tortuously slow stop on her back while his questioning tone hung in the air. With a reluctance Ophis wasn't used to showing, she pushed herself off of the boy's legs and onto her own butt. I apologize. Naruto's eyebrows shot up at the apology. The look on the dragon's face as she rose her head to meet his eyes were of pure sincerity as she sat across from him. Portals have become difficult since that. Naruto nodded along to her words, silencing her attempts to verbalize her interaction with Cao Cao. She offered him a nod in thanks before looking around herself. I have returned, Ophis muttered to herself while attempting to rise up to her feet. Her attempt landed in failure when her legs gave out beneath her. A fall back to the ground was eliminated when Naruto reached his arms out and grabbed her. She found herself deposited back onto the blonde's lap once more as he kept her from falling. I'm more tired than I thought. Ophis blinked owlishly before looking back at Naruto. I apologize again. I am halting us. The blonde immediately began to shake his head before clasping his hands together. No worries. With those words, several clouds of smoke surrounded the two. Ophis watched the smoke clear out several moments later, revealing a small squadron of blonde clones. With a quick salute to their creator, the clones turned from them and dashed away in different directions. While you recover for a bit, I'll have my clones go out and search for us. Naruto let loose a bright smile at Ophis while his clones disappeared into the distance. The dragon watched the copies go for a while before moving her attention back onto the smiling blonde. A surge of admiration flew through her as she sent him a small nod. Thank you. The dragon said, earning her a nod from Naruto. With that exchange, the two descended into silence. With the silence in place, both parties soon became aware of their current positions. Naruto. As the blonde started to grow a bit anxious with Ophis sitting in his lap, she called out to him. He was forced to crane his neck downward to meet her gaze. I want to talk. If it wasn't for the slowness of the words, Naruto would have thought he had misheard the girl. Ophis wanting to talk. That went against everything he thought about the dragon. But, after listening to her words while staring down into her eyes, Naruto found himself hard-pressed to deny her words. Talk? Naruto found himself questioning her anyway. She nodded again, giving him the confirmation he needed. It was an odd request yet one that he didn't have any problems fulfilling. I can do that. His enthusiasm came flowing back through him with those words. What would you like to talk about out? That threw the dragon for a bit of a spin. She hadn't prepared for that question. So, she allowed her desires to speak for herself. You? Me? Yes. This decision threw Naruto for a bit of a loop. He hadn't exactly shared much of his history with anyone here, excluding Kaneko. The thought of sharing his past with the dragon made him hesitate with his response. Looking down at her, though, made that hesitation fade away. Her wide, gray eyes made her seem so innocent in his eyes. After their morning interactions and the past week between the two, he had been finding it harder and harder to not look past the facade of the dragon god. A god? No, she wasn't nothing like that. He had met gods. Compared to them, she was nothing but a simply curious girl. Sure. Naruto replied with a soft sigh. The decision had been hard for him. Yet, when he saw the tiniest of smiles appear on the dragon's face, he couldn't find it within himself to complain. Since he couldn't complain, he did the one thing he could. He started talking. Chapter 35. No, Michael, I need you to stop being stubborn and listen. I am not being stubborn. I am simply not allowing myself to believe in such ludicrous claims. Michael, do not AC. Enough, Raphael. The archangel's voice boomed through the office, shutting the angel's mouth in an instant. The pleasant look on Michael's face had been tainted with a striking frown and a scowl. His eyes swept over his militant counterpart, meeting Raphael's eyes after several moments of tense silence. I'm not going to attempt to change your mind when you're already so steadfast. Just know of my warning. The angel of health spoke before giving a short bow of his head. He then turned on his heel and walked out of the room, leaving Michael alone in the room. Say what you're going to say. Michael said out loud despite how empty his office was. His audience became clear when Gabriel shimmered into existence next to him in a quick flash of white light. A frown marred her face while she stared at her brother's back. You should at least consider his advice. Michael rounded on the beautiful angel at her statement, his mouth parted open in preparation for a response. At the sight of the worry on his sister's voice, his mouth came to a slow close. A sigh instead slipped through his lips before his eyes came to a slow close. Even you, Gabriel. The female angel shook her head at his words before taking a step toward her brother. She reached out with her hand and placed it on the man's shoulder, making him open his eyes to look at her. Tired eyes met concerned ones as the siblings stared at each other. This is just as impactful on me, Michael. At the sound of his name, the man turned away, breaking eye contact while he strode across the room. Gabriel watched him walk around the office for several aimless, silent moments before he settled near its door. I can't accept it. You may have to. We can no longer ignore him. We have to accept this as a possibility. Her response was quick while she stepped out from behind his desk. Her eyes sparkled with concern while they traced the tired rising and falling of her brother's shoulders from behind. A sigh echoed along with his movements. It's a possibility that I never would have thought possible. Did you think father's death was possible? Gabriel spoke, knowing the effect it would have on her brother. She wasn't surprised when he turned to her, hurt and disbelief in his eyes. We've grown past the point of the unimaginable, the angel pressed forward. She knew it was best for her to keep talking instead of letting her brother to have a word. This is a time of change, Michael. Father taught us to never let ignorance blind us. Do not let his teachings go to waste. He is still with us. With those words, Gabriel walked out of the office, brushing past Michael as she left. The seraph watched her leave for a moment before the closing doors obscured his view, leaving him alone with his thoughts once more. Father. The angel thought before turning his back to the door. In times of trouble, his thoughts would always trail back to his father, and now was no different. So, it was with a practiced ease that Michael did the one thing he could do at that moment. Our Father, who art in heaven. Hallowed by thy name. Why didn't you kill him? Killing isn't always the answer, Ophis. Seemed like the answer in that situation. Naruto rolled his eyes when the dragon's monotone reply echoed from his side. He cut his eyes down toward the girl and saw that she was sending him a dead-eye look of her own. He attacked and tried to kill you. Why shouldn't you kill him? Ophis questioned. He was my friend. Do friends try to kill each other? Is that why we're friends? The girl's eyes lit up with curiosity at the question, causing Naruto to groan. That light meant she wanted an answer. No, 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 no. He made sure to punctuate each word with a shake of his head. He didn't want to risk the chance of any crazy ideas getting inside the mind of the curious dragon god. Something like that could spell disaster for the entire universe. We're friends because we get along. Naruto ended up blurting out the first thing that came to mind. An upset Ophis was not something he needed to deal with at the moment. Do we? Those once dead eyes were now filled with hope and were pointed right at him. Yes, we do. He responded with little hesitation and, surprisingly, he could feel a bit of truth in his own words. The feeling brought a slight amount of ease to his mind, and the small smile from Ophis following his words only added to it. The two descended back into silence, breaking eye contact with each other to focus on the world around them. Naruto, the silence didn't last for long. The blonde looked at Ophis at the call of his name and saw that she was once again staring up at him. What is love? To his credit, the blonde barely reacted to the question. In all honesty, he had become accustomed to the wild line of questioning from Ophis. This was nothing but the norm for her to him. Well, his hand moved to the back of his neck and began to rub at the area. He could feel the dragon's eyes on him while his own traveled upward to gaze at the sky, his mind searching for the best response to the question while his eyes traced the sky's waning colors. "It's weird, you know," the blonde started before moving his eyes back down to Ophis. "Love isn't something you can see or hold." Naruto had to hold himself back from laughing when the dragon held her hands up in front of her face to examine them. Even people who are in love don't really know what it is. He continued on, bringing her attention back onto him. "If I had to describe it, I would call it a strong attraction. You can't tell where it came from or how it got to where it is. It can make you feel weird like you never felt before. It's really confusing and frustrating and makes you want to tear out your hair at times, but it also makes you really, really happy." He finished his statement off with a strong. He never imagined he would be attempting to explain love to a primordial dragon being, yet here he was. Despite the odds, he thought he did a pretty good job. Going off the thoughtful expression on the dragon's face, he couldn't have done too bad. "Love," Ophis repeated out loud. She took a brief glance down at the folds of her lap before looking back up to Naruto. The blonde had decided to look back up at the sky, offering her the perfect opportunity to stare at him once more. Like before, the sight of her boy entranced her and she found the corners of her lips curling upward without command. She did not correct this unconscious movement. After what she had learned from the blonde, smiling didn't seem too bad. The shopkeep and the dragon sat in silence for a while, enjoying each other's presence and the comfort that came with it. The original reason behind their visit to the dimensional gap faded from the forefront of their minds. The importance of their mission dimmed while the swirling sky of the gap occupied their thoughts. A small tingling right above his eyes was Naruto's only warning before a rush of memory slammed into his preoccupied mind. His hands went up to clutch his head while his brain attempted to sort through the mass of memories left to him by one of his clones. A low groan began to leave his mouth as the visions of his clones grew more vivid. "Are you okay?" Ophis asked with a hint of worry in her voice. Her focus had been so intently focused on the blonde that his sudden change in demeanor had actually startled her into a small jump. "I'm fine," Naruto groaned while moving his hands away from his head. His once bright and curious eyes now looked tired, almost as if he had lived a whole other lifetime within the course of a few seconds. He turned those tired eyes onto the dragon, and, for one of the few times in her lifetime, Ophis found herself troubled by the look she received. "I found out what they did with your power. There weren't many perks that came along with being a clone. Your existence could be summed up as cannon fodder, your physical being could be dispelled by a single hit and you weren't unique by any measure. Yet, the knowledge of being a clone opened up a mental gateway in the mind of the creature. The physical restrictions and cautions that his creator loosely stuck to didn't exist for him. He was daring where the original was cautious. He was wild where the original had to be controlled. So, when he had stumbled upon a stronghold in the middle of the dimensional gap, nothing but excitement had filled him. Covering several dozen acres of land, the thing was an intimidating sight. Large towers shot high into the sky, surrounded by long stone walkways. A massive wall surrounded the whole structure and the clone could spot various kinds of creatures patrolling the way. For all purposes, he should have dispelled himself at that moment so his creator would learn of the structure's location. Yet that wildness that the original had been known for as a child roared within him and demanded he put his short-lived existence into use. So, he did something stupid. He decided to sneak into the fortress by himself. As a clone, an entity broken within a single hit, this was the stupidest waste of an existence he could have done. He had reminded himself of this over and over while scaling the spiked walls of the structure. The thought traveled through his head while sneaking past dozens of different mythical creatures and magical humans. It was at its strongest when he had somehow managed to stumble upon what looked to be Cao Cao's personal chambers, guarded by a twin pair of magicians. The temptation to charge the room and put an end to the man had been strong, but he managed to contain himself. Now though, he knew he had reached his peak of stupidity. Staring at the creature in front of him, the clone knew it couldn't get much worse. For once in the total lifetime of all the Naruto's clone, sorrow for his creator filled him. The absolute headache that was going to be brought to the boy due to his discovery was something even the clone could empathize with. "Hello." His words came out slow and unsure while he looked at the creature in front of them. It had yet to show him any aggression, yet the Naruto clone wasn't taking any chances. It had already taken enough of those in its limited lifetime. "Hello." Its response was quick, curt, and sent a chill up the clone's spine. It reminded him so much so of a certain dragon god. Everything about the creature in front of him reminded him of Ophis. Its long black hair, short stature, innocent female features and poorly concealed feeling of overwhelming power reeked of Ophis. It felt as if he was looking at a clone. "So, who are you?" the Naruto clone questioned after several moments of silence. The small girl broke the silence with a small hum before looking into the blonde's eyes. "My name is Lilith. Why have I been tasked with this?" Apollo wasn't a man of arrogance. He did not think himself above his fellow god. He was a man of warmth, poetry and equality. But why me, though? Why couldn't Hestia do this? She's much nicer. The god thought to himself while he walked through the crowd of traveling students. His ethereal body made him go unnoticed and untouched by the sea of chatty teenagers. Despite this, he found himself more annoyed than ever by their presences. He couldn't even find it within himself to admire the beauty of some of them while his feet carried him with great reluctance toward his target. "I need this to be over quicker," the man muttered to himself before his form blurred into a single day of golden light. The light snaked its way through the ocean of students within a matter of moments before shooting across the campus grounds. Its journey continued for a mere instant more before it shifted back into the Apollo's human form. He looked up at the somewhat decrepit door in front of him with a comforted smile on his face. "That's better," the god muttered to himself before reaching out to open the door. His attempt came to a quick stop when an arc of electricity leapt from the doorknob and sunk into his skin. A loud yelp left his mouth while he jerked his arm backward. He clutched his stinging appendage with his uninjured hand while glaring down at the inconspicuous doorknob. Its clean, bronze surface reflected his disgruntled expression, seemingly mocking him with each passing moment. Apollo quickly decided he didn't like this particular doorknob. With a small huff, Apollo transformed into the singular beam of light before propelling himself toward the door. His form phased through its surface with ease and he popped out on the other side of it with a smug grin on his face. He turned to face the door, making sure to look down at its knob, while an air of self-satisfaction radiated from him. "You can't keep out Apollo." "No one can." The man spoke to the inanimate door before turning to observe the room. He took immediate notice of the various archaic and dark symbols hanging from its walls. The whole area was not well lit, adding to its bleak atmosphere. All in all, the god hated the room. "Needs much more light," the man noted to himself before his ears picked up on the sound of running water. Before he could even begin to stop himself, he began to move toward the sound. His light and airy form cut through the darkness of the room with a swiftness he had become famous for as his ears guided him. The speed of his walking only increased when the subtle sound of humming reached his ears. The noise was nearly drowned out by the running water, yet the god's enhanced senses allowed him to hear it. "Is someone showering?" the god thought to himself while the sounds grew louder with each taken step. His question soon became answered when he was forced to stop lest he walk through an oddly placed curtain. The thing sat between two long spans of walls and its odd pink color contrasted with the rest of the room's interior. He didn't ponder on the oddity for long before pushing his head past it with a caution-filled curtain had done a mystical job in concealing the large amount of warm mist that hung in the air on the other side of it, leaving Apollo to find out the hard his face broke through the barrier. He was forced to suck in huge breath of water vapor. He choked down a strained cough, his face red with effort, while holding a hand to his mouth. Several muffled puffs of air left his lungs, left his lips, but nothing further past that. With his slyness still in place, the god attempted to peer through the thick fog of the room. The sound of humming had hit the apex of its volume, alerting the god that it was a definite that someone was in the room. As he strained his eyes to catch a glimpse of the person, he missed the sinister presence behind him. "Perverted god, is this how you want to die?" a voice cooed into his ear from behind him, startling the god into yelping. He moved to turn around to see who had managed to sneak up on him, but the turn of his head was stopped when the bottom end of a metal tray slammed into his head. While the tray dented inward from the impact, his now stinging head was forced backward. His assailant wasn't the merciful type, he learned when they then proceeded to slam the edge of the tray against the crown of his head. He was sent tumbling ass first into the mist-covered room while golden blood oozed from a small cut on his head. "Wait, wait, wait!" Apollo shouted when the sound of the tray cutting through the air reached him. His pleading came a little too late as the late side of the tray met his cheek, forcing him to grab onto the ground lest he be thrown face first toward it. The sting left by the tray made the god decide that he did not want to get hit by that thing again. "I'm here to learn about Naruto." The god shouted, hoping that the knowledge of his mission would stop his assailant. Though, he still had his hands raised above his head. You could never be too safe, he often told himself. Aquino, take him to the main room and then go get Kaneko. Apollo heard a voice say from deeper into the room. He could only assume that this was the Hummer he had been searching for before he was yanked up to his feet by a hand. The hand, gripping him by his arm, then pulled him out of the mist room, restoring his full sight back to him. Your lucky Ria-sama is so nice. I would have loved to decorate the whole tray with your beautiful golden blood. Without the mist or a tray obscuring his vision, Apollo could now see the beautiful, black-haired girl standing by his side. He didn't get much time to admire his figure, for he couldn't take his eyes off the sight of the bloody tray the girl held. The look she was sending him combined with the protective way she was holding the dented tray made the god want to exit the building immediately. Unfortunately, he would not get the chance to do so. At least not at the moment, for the devilish girl was guiding him to the room's couch. A hard push from the girl sent him off his feet and ass first onto the couch. Bewilderment filled the god at the act. He had been manhandled by the young girl for the past several minutes, and by the joyed expression on her face, the girl knew it. Her grin all but screamed that at him before she turned and skipped out of the room. He had expected to run into a bit of oddity during his visit, but nothing he could have imagined would have prepared him for this. I see you've met Aquino. A voice calling from the opposite end of the room beckoned the god to it. He turned his head and was greeted with a stunning and now clothed young beauty whose wet red head laid spread out over her shoulder. The sight of her reminded him of his own coveted Rackle, so much so that he could imagine the white and golden robes of his servant hanging from the girl's body while she preached to the people about his grace. Aquino? Is that her name, huh? Apollo paused to rub his chin. The thoughts running through his head was soon turning this waste of a visit into a golden opportunity. Apollo-san. The man's attention was brought away from his thoughts by the call of the red-headed girl. Half of her now sat hidden behind a desk. The other half revealed her idle gaze while her head sat supported by her clasped hands. Ah, you've heard of me. The god sat a little higher in his seat at this. It always stroked his ego to hear others, especially ones outside of his own pantheon, know of him. It served as a testament to how far the reach of the sun god stretched. Let it be known that Apollo was not a modest man. I have heard of you, she responded before leaning back into her seat. It hasn't been all pleasant, but I have heard it. That second comment served to deflate the god's inflated ego in a single moment, causing him to sink low into the couch. Before he could sink too low into his pit of depression, Rias stood up from her seat, bringing the god back to alertness. Apollo, son of Zeus and Leto, god poetry, music, the sun, and medicine, to name a few. With each uttered word, the god's deflated ego received a puff of confidence. You're also the same Apollo who is known as a disease bringer. A herald of the plague. The indirect murderer of Achilles. A killer of children. A houndish man whose advances have driven women to suicide. A rapist, a liar, a thief and a coward. And just like that, he was brought back down to his basest level. The intense gaze she was sending reminded him of the one his mother, Leto, used to send him when he did something to anger one of the gods. All of that was in the past. I am a changed person. The god's words seemed to fall on deaf ears if Rias' unchanging expression was anything to go by. Any hope of winning the girl over died in that instant as the god stared into the girl's apathetic eyes. The tension within the room received a temporary pause when its door slid up with an audible creak. Both devil and god turned their head toward the sound and caught sight of Kaneko entering the room with Aquino right behind him. The young girl looked less than pleased while she walked her way across the room to stand at her king's side. We came sprinting over. By the joyful tone on the Aquino's face and the stoic one of the Nekashus, Apollo felt as if he had entered into the lion's den. Even with his godly nature, he couldn't help but shrink down beneath the combined gazes of the three girls. Now, Apollo-san. The god's attention was focused back onto Rias. You said you came here to talk about Naruto. Well, yes. I wish to discuss something. What do you want with Naruto? Kaneko cut the god, forcing his attention back onto her. His baby blue eyes met her golden eyes and he was forced to bear the full weight of her silent passion. Well, we, the Greek pantheon, merely wish to extend an olive branch out to him. We believe that a partnership between our two groups would result in a beneficial outcome for all. The god allowed his natural charisma to take hold and do the talking for him. The words leaving his mouth only served as a reminder on why he was chosen to come speak to the devil. If there was anyone among the Greeks who could woo a crowd to their side, it was going to be him. "You're the worst." The dry voice coming from the Nekasha was beginning to prove that God wrong. None of this was going the way he wanted it to go. This became even more clear to him when the small girl began walking toward him. "You're a liar." "I don't like liars. Naruto hates them." Each taken step by the girl made the god shrink down and down into his seat. A yelp almost left his mouth when she jabbed an angry finger into the middle of his chest. "Do not lie about Naruto-kun or I'll kill you," she growled out, shocking the god and the other devils present. The shock continued to grow when a mist of black began to rise from the sole of her feet. The mist drifted up the length of her body, casting a long, dense shadow to fall over half of her features. Her visible golden eye seemed to grow even brighter in the contrast as it peered down at Apollo. "And, if I can't kill you, Naruto will." Burning fires on top of Mount Olympus. His temple along with every other on the mountain had been rendered into a pile of rubble. The bodies of his fellow gods, his family members, laid cold and unmoving. Their golden blood painted the white limestone streets. Muted screams, some sounding all too familiar for his liking, tore away at his hearing. The grand street of Olympus, a road he traveled countless of times in his youth, laid in utter ruins. He saw hell on that street. And, sitting at its end was the blonde he has come looking for. "So, Apollo," at her words, the vision shattered, leaving the god face to face with Kaneko. Any facade of confidence lay broken at his feet, shattered by the girl's gaze. "What do you want with Naruto?" Apollo wanted to open his mouth to denounce the girl's word. He wanted to rise up and strike the girl down for her insolent behavior. For daring to threaten an Olympian. Yet, every time he willed himself to speak, a hand would grab at his throat. It held him close and tight, whispering to him the doom that would fall onto him if he followed through with his threat. I. The meekness of his own voice forced him to stop. He swallowed hard, attempt to will any of his remaining confidence to the surface. His emotional well came up dry, leaving him only with the feeling of impending doom and grief. "We wish to recruit Naruto into unsealing the beast of apocalypse to use to overthrow my father." Once the words left past his lips, the pressure around his throat faded away. He slumped down into the couch with a long sigh, missing the shared looks between the three girls. Rias released an almost silent sigh before running a hand through the red tresses of her hair. "I need to call my brother. Life, so far at least, has been interesting." She would have called it odd, but she did not have anything else to compare it to. The short string of experiences that made up her existence didn't offer much variety. Until now. Her eyes swept over to the creature standing with its back to her. The spiky, yellow tuft of hair sat atop its head, swayed back and forth with its movement. The sight reminded her of the man, Chow Chow if she remembered his name, who had been there at the beginning of her memories. The two seemed to made up of a similar material, though their behavior differed from one another. "I can't believe this." Those same words were the only ones he had uttered in the past 30 minutes, excluding the small chat he had with a clone of his. She had been surprised when the boy had conjured up the copy, and that feeling carried over when she watched the thing explode into smoke moments later. The death of the clone brought her sadness. One's life should never be so short and fleeting. She wished she had more memories. Life had only started weeks ago and her experiences had been mostly confined to this room. Every once in a while, Chow Chow would visit along with others. They would question her, asking about her emotional and physical well-being. The physical questions she could understand since it had been explained to her that she would eventually serve in the role of a bodyguard. The questions dealing with her emotions troubled her. They brought about odd sensations and feelings within her. She didn't like them at all. Not one bit. Like distant thunder rumbling from the horizon, the room began to shake, causing Lilith and the clone turn to one another. Their attention was turned upward when the shaking increased, sending bits and pieces of the ceiling falling to the ground. "What is that?" she questioned while moving her attention over to the clone. By his loud proclamation of relief, she assumed he had some knowledge on what was causing the shaking. That should be the original me and Ophis. Probably more of her than him. He muttered out the second half, but she managed to pick up on it. The original part interested her. The way the blonde said it made it seem as if he wasn't a person to begin with. "Who is Ophis?" she asked. Her overall curiosity soared when she saw the boy cringe at her words. Her words had managed to trigger something within him, something painful if his reaction was anything to go by. She is. The clone started before his mouth came to a close. It repeated this action several times, each time making Lilith's curiosity grow. The repeating pattern came to an end when a sigh slipped past the clone's lips. He turned to look at the girl with an exhausted quality to his eyes. It's a long story. You all will die. Naruto was a bit conflicted at the moment. Floating high in the air, clothed in the golden chakra of the sage, his eyes cut between Ophis and the ground below. The dragon's face was set in a harsh mask while her corrosive dark energy surrounded her in the form of a massive dragon. When his clone's memories had struck him, he knew he was in for a heap of trouble. He wanted so badly to dismiss the thoughts as mere illusions, but he knew he couldn't. He also knew he couldn't hide the information from the dragon. This wasn't a minor detail that could be swept away, never to be spoken about again. Another being had been created using her power. He had to tell her, "You all stole from me," he heard her say before simulating a downward punch. Her avatar followed her movement, bringing its massive clawed hand high through the air before bringing it down on the structure below. The condensed energy tore through one of the towers with ease, sending its bricks scattering and crashing across the ground. Ophis then sent her arms sweeping to her right side. Her avatar followed suit, its ethereal arm plowing through entire sections of the structure. This may have been a mistake, Naruto mumbled to himself while watching the dragon tear through the building. Through his clone's memories, he knew that there were a large amount of living creatures within the fortress. Ophis attacks were bound to have killed a small amount of them. Yet, on the other hand, these people were responsible for lying, kidnapping her and stealing her powers. He could see the reasons behind her anger, and, for the life of him, couldn't not justify her actions. Chow Chow, you've lived too long. That, Naruto could agree with. And, despite his peaceful nature, he knew that to avoid destruction, you sometimes have to do things you didn't like. So, it was with those thoughts that Naruto manifested a clone and sent it diving toward the fortress, or what was left of it. He watched his copy disappear through one of the newly created holes of the building before moving his attention back to Ophis. She looked to be in the process of charging up an attack, if the appearance of a large black orb in the mouth of the dragon was anything to go by. This is not going to be good. The moment we enter the room, you fill it with dimension lost and teleport us away. I don't care where, just make sure you have Lilith. Do you understand, George? Yes, Chow Chow. The two Longinus users ran through the shaking hallways of the building. Distant screams could be heard over the sound of their pounding feet while they ran. Hell had been unleashed upon the duo. It had come quick without warning. It had struck them when they least expected it. And now, it was threatening to ruin all their plans. I will not allow this beast to stop me. Chow Chow thought while making a sharp turn around a hallway corner, his feet slipping on the loose carpet of the hallway. He slammed his hand against a wall, recovering his balance before continuing his sprint. George didn't have as much luck in his turning. He found his face planted firmly on the ground while his leader stopped in front of one of the hallway's doors. He didn't hesitate in reaching out and pulling the door ajar, revealing its contents to him. Hello, Chow Chow. Lilith greeted the man with a lazy wave. Her greeting fell on deaf ears, for the man's attention was on the other occupant of the room. His fellow blonde looked sheepish as he stood next to the young girl. The clone offered up a bashful wave while inching toward Lilith. The man wouldn't dare attempt to hurt him if the dragon clone was in the way, right? The clone was proven wrong when the man's hand began to emit a blinding light, forcing him to shield his eyes. Lilith seemed unaffected by the light as she stood staring at the hero descendant. The clone kept its eyes covered for several seconds before moving his hand out of the way, revealing a now spear-wielding Chow Chow. He raised the weapon high into the air while taking aim at the blonde. I won't question how you got here. I'll simply DEA. His words became trapped in his throat when a large beam of energy blasted the hallway behind him out of existence, exposing the room to a view of the dimensional gap. The force from the attack sent him down to the ground while the room around him shook. The Naruto clone was in a similar position while Lilith didn't look the least bit bothered, if her bored expression was anything to go by. The girl did raise an eyebrow when a black tendril shot through the air toward the down Chow Chow. It wrapped around his slender waist before he could take notice of its presence. As he realized that he was within its grip, it retracted back through the air, pulling the man along with it and leaving the clone and Lilith alone once more. Was that Ophis? Lilith turned to Naruto after several seconds of silence. During the silence, he had managed to climb back up to his feet and now stood facing her. Any sign of his worry was now gone from its face. In its place stood a mask of acceptance. Yeah. That was her. Chao's tentaculated flight through the air lasted for a short few moments in which he was able to gaze upon the wrecked ruins of his fortress. Half of it had fallen to black flames while the other half had turned to rubble. He didn't have much time to lament the loss of the base before he slammed against the ground. As his back met the ground, a scream attempted to worm its way out of his throat, but he managed to clench his jaw shut, stifling the sound. He wouldn't allow himself to fall to such a level, even in the of destruction. This grim determination allowed him to turn his gaze upward, meeting the angry gaze of Ophis. The girl sat several stories high in the air, yet her eyes burned a hole straight down to the man. Chao took note of the tendril of energy restraining him that came from her body before returning her glare with a slight upturn of his lips. Back so soon, Ophis? I'm surprised to see you still standing. We put you through the ringer rather well. The man shouted up to the girl. A slight narrowing of the dragon's eyes were the man's sign of how stupid his words were before he found himself lifted back up through the air. His journey carried him to entry level of the dragon's avatar before he was sent rocketing back down to the ground. The force of the meeting cratered the earth beneath his body and forced a scream out of the man's lungs. The scream didn't last for too long when Chao bit deep into his lip, drawing blood but closing his mouth. With his lips covered in crimson, he directed his gaze, now much more shaky, up at Ophis. I will not succumb. I will not falter. My place is above you. The man shouted before his spear appeared in his open hand. He clenched his fist around the weapon before thrusting it toward Ophis. The tip of the weapon began to glow a brilliant array of colors as Chao kept it focused on the dragon. The confident look on the man's face seemed to spell out his victory while the colors reached their peak brightness. Face the true power of human, so consumed in his own attack, Chao never saw a snake slither its way out of the dragon's foot toward him. He was caught completely off guard when the snake sunk its teeth deep into his arm, turning his words into a pained scream. His spear went falling from his hand and disappeared out of existence while he attempted to shake the creature off his body. His efforts proved fruitless as the creature kept its jaw locked. You are pathetic. Ophis muttered while she watched the man flail his arm in an attempt to remove her snake. She stood staring at the scene for several moments, allowing it to burn itself in her memories before raising her arm. Her avatar followed her movements, it raising its massive arm an instant after her. She stopped her arm a little above her head before closing her fingers into a fist, her avatar copying her movements the whole way through. She allowed herself to stay still for a few moments before bringing her fist crashing downward. Her avatar's fist flew through the air before landing on her target, the down Chao. Any last words would be forever lost when the fist slammed through its body, obscuring it from view. Ophis made a twisting motion with her first, making her avatar grind the man's smeared body into the ground. She kept this up for several seconds before pulling her fist away, revealing that Chao was now a red smear. Naruto watched this all occur with grim acceptance. He wasn't happy watching the man be crushed into the ground, yet he couldn't find it within himself to stop the girl from doing so. After what the man had done, death wasn't the worst thing that could have been done to him. The blonde's attention was focused onto Ophis when he noticed the layers of her avatar beginning to fade away. He lowered himself down to the ground while the massive ethereal dragon grew shorter and shorter. It didn't take long for the construct to fade away completely, leaving Ophis standing in front of a chakra-cloaked Naruto. The girl's gaze was full of exhaustion as she stared at the blonde. Killing him was the answer. Ophis breathed out. The girl looked as if she was moments away from dropping, yet her voice sounded more sure than ever. In all honesty, he wanted to laugh at her and was close to doing just that but stopped when the sound of a twin set of footsteps reached his ears. Ophis must have heard the sound at the same instant because she turned with him to face the noise. The exhaustion on her face cleared up in an instant at the sight that greeted her. She's all safe and sound, boss. The Naruto clone said while walking next to Lilith. With a nod from his creator, the clone dispelled itself. The sudden arrival of smoke didn't seem to bother the young girl while she continued her walk toward Naruto and Ophis. She locked eyes with Ophis while each taken step brought her closer to the girl. Naruto watched the two with a held breath as Lilith stopped directly in front of Ophis. The two lookalikes stood in silence for several long moments with their eyes locked together. Worry began to build up within the blonde's breast when the silence dragged on. He began to subtly inch away from the duo while keeping his attention locked on them. He didn't want to be anywhere near here if a fight broke out between the two. "Hello, mother." Lilith broke the silence, forcing Ophis' eyes to widen in extreme shock. The girl didn't stop there as she turned toward Naruto. Before the words could leave her mouth, the blonde could feel his own eyes widening. The pit of worry slammed down into his stomach while the girl's lips moved to talk. "And, hello, father. Thank you both for rescuing me." Chapter 36. Who thought this was a good idea? Each word except for the last was punctuated with the sound of a smack and a small cloud of smoke. The lives of 6 clones had been lost to the agitated fists of Naruto Uzumaki. When the blonde moved to punch the last clone, the being made the wise decision of dodging out of the way of the fist. His actions earned him a glare from his creator while the clone held his hands up in defense. Well, the clone was the one who told Lilith. And really, the clone is that clone's existence came to an end when Naruto's fist slammed into his face. The boy released a huff while the cloud of smoke dispersed around his fist before he turned his attention to his right where Ophis and Lilith stood to face each other. "Mother." Ophis tilted her head to the side at Lilith's call. Her brow furrowed while she ran her eyes over her clone. When Naruto had first told her that Cao Cao had created a copy of her using the power that he stole, she has been infuriated. The rage that had built up within her had been the sum of the strongest she had ever felt. All she wanted was to eradicate everything at the fortress, including the bastardized copy of herself. Yet, standing in front of her look-alike, she didn't feel any of that rage. Her chest wasn't tight with anger. It sat loose and free in her daughter's presence. It was a relatively new feeling, one introduced through her time with Naruto, yet it didn't feel awkward to the eternal dragon. "Daughter." She tested the word out with slight hesitation and found its sound to be somewhat freeing. A strange warmth began to form within her bosom while Lilith nodded at her. "It is nice to meet you, mother. Our separation was puzzling, but I admit it has made our reunion much sweeter." Ophis took immediate note of her daughter's verbosity. It was a stark contrast to her own way of speaking in as few words as possible. Inwardly, she was grateful for it. That small difference made it much easier to view the girl as a separate being. "Father doesn't seem as thrilled," Lilith said while turning her head to look over at Naruto. The blonde was looking over as well yet showed he was anything but enthusiastic. "He's had a long day." Ophis spoke while she watched the blonde trudge his way toward them. Each taken step by him seemed to take a little out of his soul if the look on his face was anything. After several silent moments, he arrived where the dragon duo stood. He stood looking at Lilith for a short while before switching his attention over to Ophis. "Are you okay to take us back?" His words sounded so tired coming from his mouth, she noted while nodding. Her raising of the fortress and the sudden introduction of Lilith had left her with a surprising amount of energy. She moved to summon a portal to transport the group of 3 back to Naruto's home but was stopped when a hand landed on her shoulder. "Allow me, mother." Ophis raised an eyebrow after turning to see Lilith with her hand up. The two locked eyes for several moments before the dragon responded with a nod. She took a step away from her daughter while the girl raised her arms high into the air. She brought her 2 hands together in a clasped union before shutting her eyes. Naruto and Ophis watched in silence while the girl stood with her outstretched arms. As the moments began to stretch on, the duo began to doubt the girl's ability to reproduce Ophis' technique. That doubt was swiftly wiped away when the girl started to pull her hands apart. With each separated inch, a rift began to take from. The observing duo watched with shocked interest while the girl, with her bare hands, tore a hole in the dimensional gap. The young finished off the action with a loud grunt while spreading her arms fully apart. The rift responded to her movement, spreading to nearly 4 times its original size. With the portal created, Lilith turned around to face her parents before giving a slight bow of her head. "After you, mother and father." Serzex was bored. And, oh boy, did it show. If anyone in the meeting room bothered to look his way, they would have seen the man idly forming a pyramid out of a piece of paper. The presence of the Greeks is alarming. As per the norm for past few months, they seem to congregate near Naruto Uzumaki's shop. Serzex glanced up at the mention of the blonde's name. At the sight of Ajuka presenting with one of his tablets, the devil sighed before returning his attention back to his pyramid. Naruto Uzumaki. The thought of the name made the man roll his eyes. Ever since the boy had come charging into his life, he had been nothing but trouble. And just when he thought all of the excitement had started to die down with the peace talks, the boy still managed to attract trouble. I say we confront them immediately. Surzex mouthed the words of the devil representative in a childish manner while lifting the pyramid in his hands. In his own opinion, the devils were too quick to act. Their impatience had been the cause of a lot of strife in the past. When is this stupid meeting over? The devil thought to himself while crushing the pyramid in his hands. He slouched his head and arms down onto the table while staring over at Ajuka. Despite the fact that the man's mouth was moving, Surzex wasn't hearing a single word being said. His mind had left the meeting a long while ago. Surzex-sama. The man's ears perked up at the sound of a voice coming from behind him. He turned his head and felt his face light up in an instant at the sight of his beautiful wife. His eyes drank in her figure for several moments before meeting her eyes. Rias has requested your presence. The woman barely managed to get the words out of her mouth before her husband was up out of his seat. The man wrapped her up in a massive hug, lifting her off of her feet for a brief moment before throwing her into what used to be his seat. She managed to catch a brief glimpse of his back before he disappeared out of the doors of the room in a blur of red motion, leaving her alone to deal with the curious yet knowing looks of the remaining devils in the room. Rias? Ajuka asked with a raised eyebrow. Graphia gave a seldom nod in reply while fixing her outfit. Like so many times before, she would have to take responsibility for her husband. What else was new? Despite that the two were living together, Kuroka rarely got to have real personal moments with her sister. The fact that the girl was living with her boyfriend made it somewhat difficult, especially with how hectic the boy's life was. Though, whenever she could steal away the girl, she would gladly do so. Whenever frustrated, I'm a hijack Delta. In the PJs, my blend tape plays, bullets are stray. Kuroka let loose a sigh that was immediately drowned out by the two speakers playing from the opposite side of the room. While she did love her sister beyond belief, she had to question her interest in music. Of all things to have an ear for, the young Nekashu was obsessed with American rap music. It was odd beyond belief, seeing the 4-foot-something girl bobbing her head to the bass-heavy track and rampant cursing, yet that sight made her smile. Maybe it was because of how ridiculous it was, or maybe it was because it was her sister. Either way, Kuroka had learned to embrace it. Kaniko's raised hand stopped her older sister from speaking. Kuroka rolled her eyes at the gesture as the girl's head bobbed away in a frenzy. The older Nekashu was prepared to reach over and pause the music, an act that would unknowingly earn her the eternal ire of her sister, but stopped herself when a strong wind began to blow through the apartment. The odd thing about the wind was that not a single window in the room was open. Ah, Kaniko. Kuroka's words went ignored by her sister once more. The girl was too deep into the music to take notice of the anomaly taking place within the room, leaving Kuroka as the sole witness. The wind within the room grew stronger, enough to send to the locks of their hair blowing across their face. The former stray devil rose up to her feet, her eyes searching for the source of the wind while Kaniko remained firmly planted on the ground, her head still bobbing along to the music. Even when the wind reached a point where it began to shift the furniture of the room, the girl remained ignorant to it all. It became hard for the girl to ignore what was going on in the room when a portal appeared in the center of the room. Kuroka let loose a loud shriek at its appearance while Kaniko stopped moving her head to look at the anomaly. Her eyes stayed transfixed on the thing as 3 figures came out of the portal. 2 of the figures she recognized, one being her ragged boyfriend while the other being the dragon god that had been living under the same roof as her. The other figure, though, Kaniko wasn't familiar with. She was the last to exit the portal, and with her entry into the living room, the portal faded from existence. The young girl made an immediate beeline to stand in between Naruto and Ophis. It was there that Kaniko took notice of the similarities between the new girl and Ophis. The two might as well have been twins with how much they looked like each other. "Hello, Naru!" Kuroka shouted from behind the safety of the couch. At the sight of the Ophis look-alike, she knew that her peaceful morning had come to an end. Now was the time to try to avoid as much damage as she could. The blonde let out a grunt in response before trudging over to his couch. The group of 4 women watched him collapse onto the piece of furniture with a loud sigh before closing his eyes. With the boy seemingly out of commission for the moment, the group focused their attention inward. Ophis. Kaneko decided it would be best to address the dragon first. With the way her boyfriend looked, she wasn't going to get many answers out of him, leaving the dragon as the next best source. Kaneko. The dragon nodded in response. The two shared a brief look with one another before they both turned their attention to the dragon's clone. In the brief moment that they had taken their eyes off of her, the girl had managed to make her way away from Ophis over to the set of speakers. They had managed to survive the appearance of the portal and were still going strong with Kaneko's music. The Buddha monks in your trunk, turn the bass up. Not stories by Aesop. What is this? Lilith mumbled to herself while standing inches away from the speakers. The loudness of the speakers sent her hair blowing across her face. She reached out an interested hand only to pull it back when a loud string of bass nearly pushed her away. That is rap music, the best kind of music. Lilith turned to see Kaneko was now standing behind her. The two met eyes for a brief moment before the clone turned her attention back to the speakers. Rap? Lilith muttered out, do you like it? Kaneko managed to pick up on the girl's mumbling despite the loud music being played on inches away from her. Lilith said nothing at first. She seemed too entranced by the music in front of her to listen to the nekashu. Yes. The girl showed she was listening when she turned and belted out the single word. Kaneko's face lit up at the response, her lips stretching into a small smile. Do you want to hear more? The young dragon hesitated for a brief moment before nodding her head. Kaneko did the same before clasping the girl's hand. Lilith didn't react to the sudden physical contact, nor did she when the nekashu began to pull her toward the house's hallway. I have much to show you. Those were the last words Kuroka heard from her sister before the girl, along with Lilith, disappeared down the hallway. She heard a door open and close several seconds later, alerting her that the two had retreated into Naruto's room. That was odd. Kuroka nodded at Ophis' words. Once again, her expectations had been swept away in the face of reality. She had expected violence at the sight of the three entering through the portal, but instead, she had her little sister time stolen away from her. She couldn't help but huff at the thought. Just when she was beginning to really enjoy her alone time with Kaneko, something else had to come swoop down and snatch her away. She couldn't even blame Naruto this time. The blonde's soft snores alerted her to how unwilling he was to participate in any of this. Scanning over the boy now, she could see how exhausted he was. That was until Ophis crawling onto the same couch Naruto occupied. What are you doing? Despite everything in her telling her not to, Kuroka couldn't help but voice the question when she saw the dragon set herself upon the boy's legs. Her unwillingness became cemented in her gut when Ophis turned an agitated eye over to her. I am talking to Naruto, she stated before moving her eyes back to Naruto. Once more, the need to question sprung up within the nekashu, but this time she decided to wisely keep her mouth close. The look that the god sent her told her that was for the best. You could talk to me, Kuroka thought to herself, but dared not say it out loud. The dragon had begun talking, leaving the woman to silently look on. A soft sigh slipped past her lips before she climbed back onto her previously occupied chair. If no one was going to talk with her, she would at least listen. He awoke to the soft pounding of music in the background, a light voice in the foreground and a numbness in his legs. He kept his eyes as the memories of his past 24 hours played through his mind. The thought of never opening his eyes was a prominent one. Maybe I'll go back to sleep, he thought to himself. He decided to test out his theory and kept his eyes close. He really did try, to drown out the pounding music and the voices, yet he couldn't manage it. It pained him to do it, but his eyes eventually pulled open, exposing him to the occupants of the room. What are you doing on my legs? He noted how groggy his voice sounded and wondered how long he had been asleep. He hadn't planned on sleeping in the first, especially asleep deep enough that Ophis could sit on top of his legs. I was talking. Naruto could only blink at the girl's response before letting out a sigh. His head dropped down onto the couch once again while his eyes came to a close. It's rather rude of you not to greet your guest. The ninja would have leaped up from the couch if it wasn't for the dragon sat on top of half of his body. Instead, his upper body shot upward, displacing the dragon onto the cushion next to him. He didn't pay that much mind. His attention was focused on the woman sat in his living room's chair. Nature. Ah. The woman wagged her finger at him. The warmth of her voice was off balance by the condescending tone she used. To the blonde, it felt as if he was a child getting reprimanded by his mother. Mother. Call me mother. Ophis let loose a loud scoff at this, drawing the woman's attention over to the dragon. Do you have something to say? Once again, despite the sweetness in her voice, Naruto could sense nothing but malcontent within her voice. Her words begged for someone to act against her so she could smite them. Any person with a limited understanding of social cues would have been able to pick up on this. Ophis was not one of those people. You are disgusting. The years haven't changed that, and you have changed? Gia asked with a raised eyebrow. Do you believe you have since you now gallop around in the form of a child? Better this than that whore. Why are you in my house? He had heard enough. He knew that allowing the two beings to speak would result in him sitting through what was the equal of two children fighting with one another. She turned to face him with a smile. That smile sent shivers down his spine. It didn't speak bad intentions for him, yet it didn't comfort him in any way. I came to congratulate you. She spoke while rising up to her feet. The movement made Naruto take notice that the woman had foregone wearing clothes, again. I had expected you to take care of Hades. I didn't expect you to kill the boy and take his weapon. I didn't mean to take the stupid scythe. Naruto mumbled to himself before clapping his hands together. In a puff of smoke, the scythe appeared in the air above of his. He reached up and snatched it before giving it the evil eye as he leaned back into the couch. No matter how much you try, it isn't going to go away. Death can be a bit clingy. She laughed at her words while crossing the distance between the two. The blonde kept his eyes locked with her, even when she settled in front of him. A simple eye-level glance would offer him a view that many gods and goddesses would love to have. Once she likes you, she's not going away. I'm surprised you haven't noticed. Noticed what? Naruto sat back upward at her words. The woman's smile spelled nothing but disaster for him as she stared down at him. Take a look at that little mark on your hand. His eyes widened for a brief moment before darting over to the palm of his right hand. The scythe rolled off of his lap onto the floor while he stared at the new addition on his skin. The faint outline of the sun given to him by Hagoromo was still in place. That he was thankful for. He wouldn't know what to do with himself if he didn't have the sage's power, especially with the chaos surrounding him. What he wasn't happy about was the faded scythe symbol that sat diagonally in the sun symbol. What? The blonde mumbled while moving his face closer to his hand. Gia watched, barely managing to contain her laughter, while the boy examined his hand. She saw him go through several visible stages of emotion, each one more amusing than the last. First, he was incredulous. It was so strong in the blonde, so much so that he was willing to attempt to shake his head in the hopes that the mark would disappear. When that didn't work, he turned to disbelief. Disbelief turned into anger, which involved the blonde attempting to furiously wipe away the mark with his free hand. When that didn't work, his anger turned into grief. She had to stop herself from reaching down and holding him with the way his face dropped. Finally, he settled onto acceptance. Grim acceptance, but acceptance nonetheless. What is this? Gia cooed out at his languid tone before attempting to place herself onto his lip. Her attempt ended with her seated on the arm of the couch while clutching at her sore midsection. The blonde wasn't having any of that at the moment. That's the mark of death. The primordial said after failing to find any sort of sympathy from Naruto. The look the boy sent her told her she would need to do a bit more explaining, or more than her midsection would be hurting. I thought Grumpy Osiris and his son explained T. How do you know they visited me? Anyway, death isn't a simple scythe. Gia ignored the boy's questioning, earning her a glare from him. She swept it away with a slow wave of her hand before continuing to speak. She's a bit more complicated than that. She's older than me and so much more stubborn. That mark means she's in you now. In to stay, I'm guessing. I don't want her to stay. The blonde responded in disgust while staring at the mark. The last thing he needed was another person to deal with on a daily basis. Oh, she's staying. Until you die, of course. Which is pretty odd, considering the fact that she is death itself. You would think she would enjoy that. Naruto shook his head at her words. This wasn't what he needed to hear after a nap. This wasn't at all what he needed. Father. Speaking of things he didn't need at the moment, that single word nearly managed to send Naruto back to sleep. He instead managed to power through the feeling and turn toward the sound of the voice. The sight of Lilith standing next to his girlfriend was something he neither expected or wanted. He offered up a wave in return, finding it too difficult to reply with his words. After all the hectic things that had been sprung upon the Nekashu at random, one would think he would have nothing to worry about. Yet, even he knew that Lilith was a whole other level of craziness. The fact that the girl was dead set on referring to him as her father only made things more difficult. Who is this woman? Lilith asked while moving her focus to Gia. The two women locked eyes for a brief moment before the young dragon looked over at her father. Is she bothering you? Do you need me to remove her? Ha! The goddess let loose a scoff while waving her hand at the girl. That's adorable. You think you can remove me? I'll stay for as low. The goddess' words came to an abrupt closure due to the presence of Lilith's fist in her chest. The young dragon was no longer stood by the side of the Nekashu. Instead, she stood on the lap of her supposed father. The blonde had the perfect view of Lilith ripping her hand out of the new cavity in the woman's chest, spilling chunks dirt and grass onto the couch. She threw the handful of dirt back into the wide-eyed woman's, her face a stone mask during it all. Her eyes filled with the venom her words would exude. If father wills it, I will remove you far beyond the boundaries of this house. I will remove you from existence. As Lilith and Gia locked eyes, a weight fell upon his shoulders. He wanted to tear his hair out, but the will to do so was lost upon him. Staring at the two supernatural beings, a voice spoke out to him. The voice, one he had been ignoring since his arrival in the world, begged for him to sit back. And for once, he decided to listen. So, with a sense of pleasant resignation and Lilith's feet planted in his lap, Naruto leaned back into the cushions of his couch and allowed the scene to evolve. You're bold, Gia said while the new hole in her chest began to close up. The skin of her face moved in on itself, swallowing the specks of dirt Lilith had thrown onto her, before settling back into a smile. I am a simple defendant of my father. Lilith responded, causing the older being to laugh while rising up from her seat on the couch. A defendant that I do not have the time to deal with. Gia let loose a sigh while cutting her eyes over to Naruto. The lines of her lips curved upward at his steady gaze. You have other issues to deal with. I'll return. The goddess shot the blonde a quick wink before her body sunk into the wooden floorboards of her home. Within a matter of seconds, she was out of sight, leaving Naruto alone with the tenants of his home. I do not like that woman. Lilith stated out loud, earning a nod of agreement from Kuroka, Ophis, and Kaneko. Naruto was the only one who sat unmoving, his head leaned deep into the cushion of his couch while his eyes remained shut. Silence, sweet and all-encompassing, swept over the room. He loved it, though it was bittersweet in its nature. Sweet in the peace that came along with it. Bitter because he knew it would come to a crashing end. It always did. Are you all right, father? His eyes drifted open to take in the sight of Lilith's face above his own. At the sight of her chocolate-colored eyes filled with concern for the man she considered a father in all his light, his lips lifted. His eyes became bright while his hand raised up to rest on the girl's head. I'm fine. Just a bit tired. The slight sparkle in her eyes made the action a bit more bearable. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. At least, that's what his fantasies told him. Reality decided to come smack him across the face when a tap on his shoulder grabbed his attention. A quick turn of his head brought him face to face with his girlfriend. You're a father now, eh? His mouth opened in an instant to explain himself, to somehow mitigate the chaos of the situation, but he stopped himself. The hint of amusement hit his ears. His eyes flew over Kaneko's face, searching for any confusion, anger, disappointment, and he found none. Nothing of that sort. Only a pair of curved lips and a raised eyebrow greeted him. Before he could question, he really wanted to question, Kaneko surged forward to press her lips against his own. The kiss was short, but it told the blonde nearly everything he wanted, and needed, to know. Lilith told me what happened, I put together the rest. Talk later. She whispered to him before landing another swift kiss on his cheek. I've been with Aunt Kaneko since we've arrived. Lilith's words brought his attention back to her. She's taught me about so much, including rap. Rap? He knew of his girlfriend's obsession with the genre of music. He didn't know how the girl managed to push it on another person so soon. How long had he been asleep? Yes, rap. Ever. Her words came to a quick end when a knock echoed through the room. The room's collective attention moved toward the door at the sound. Before Naruto could move to stand up and answer it, Lilith pressed him down onto the couch. I will answer it, father. She jumped off the couch and then walked over to the door. Her face was a mask of calm as she reached up and pulled open the door. Hell! Are you here to see mother or father? Out of all the greetings she expected, that hadn't been one of them. She was unaware of anyone in the house having had a child. Who is your mommy and daddy? She said while bending down toward the young girl. As she drew closer, she had to admit to herself the similarities she saw in the girl and the dragon god, Ophis. It was odd. My father is Naruto Uzumaki and my mother is Ophis. Now, why are you here? She tried to respond. She did. Yet, the pure shock of the statement made her freeze. She tried to move. It took several seconds of strain, but she managed it. Oh dear. That wasn't her proudest moment. She was used to being calm in times of turbulence, but this was too much for her to handle with grace. You have wasted my time. Leave. That was the last she heard from the girl before the door was slammed in her face. She blinked once at the rude gesture. This was not going to the way she expected this to go. She came here with a purpose, though. And that purpose beckoned her to reach out to rap on the door again. Before she could hit the second knock, the door swung open again, revealing the person she came to see. Naruto. She beamed out. Gabriel. His response was much more sedated. His wild hair and narrowed eyes made it look as if he had just stumbled out of the bed. Do you mind if I come in? He threw a hesitant glance back over his shoulder into his home before meeting her eyes. Sure. He slurred out before stepping outside. She flashed him yet another smile while moving inside of the house. That smile met a swift end when four set of eyes focused in on her. Ah, hello. The angel offered up a wave to the four women. She received 2 nods, 1 wave, and a single icy glare. She figured that was the best response she was going to get while Naruto guided her over to the sitting area. You can sit where I was. The boy's offer was greeted with a rapid shaking of her head while she held her hands up. No, no, no. I need to be standing for this. The angel said before sucking in a deep breath. Her eyes closed for a brief moment as the breath left her in one steady flow. They reopened, revealing the shining blue gems of her irises, as she directed her attention on Naruto. Naruto. I believe you are the will of my father. That's it for part 10. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.